Hello, my name's Paulie, and in my youth I was obsessed with everything Pokemon. If you were to ask my younger self, I would have told you that this property, and the video games in particular, defined who I was as a person. And while that isn't the case now, I still can't really imagine what my life would have been like without that experience. If I had never come across Pokemon, I don't know if I'd be half as interested in role-playing games, or handheld consoles, or very special anime. For better or worse, Pokemon was the introduction to a lifestyle that I haven't looked back from, and I'm sure I am not alone in that. As upon its arrival to the West in 1998, Pokemon would become a phenomenon, as the initial video game's release would quickly be accompanied by a cartoon, and trading cards, and so much merchandise, and people bought it all. Pokemon instantly cemented itself in the zeitgeist in a way children's toy companies can only dream of. But for as titanic as this multimedia property became, the one constant was the fact that everything produced here, from the seasons of the anime, to the plushies, to the design of the bootleg abominations, would all be dictated by the direction the next video games took. But for as popular and influential as the games were, they were also exclusively on, and arguably restricted to, Nintendo's handheld devices. And while I'm certain Pokemon's presence on them skyrocketed hardware sales, as a long-time fan of the series, I eventually found myself wanting more from them, and a particular sentiment began swimming around my loins. I figured if the game series was already this good, imagine what it would be like if it were created for a home console. No longer would it be restricted to simplistic pixel graphics, no longer bound to the limited memory of small cartridges. Finally, the world of Pokemon would exist on my television screen looking exactly like it did in my head as a child. And while it took 21 years after landing in the West, that question was eventually answered. A mainline Pokemon game would debut on a home console in 2019 with Pokemon Sword and Shield. But after playing it for the first time earlier this year, I was once again disappointed by the mediocrity of a new Pokemon game. It was an experience that for the entire duration caused a single question to incessantly buzz around my head. That being, why does Pokemon refuse to evolve? Admittedly, it might be a stupid and ultimately pointless game to play here, but I think this question is at the core of why I consider this game to be such a colossal disappointment. And it's something I'd like you to keep in mind as I discuss my experience with this game in length, getting into what I consider its major problems, including highlighting what it poorly introduces and what issues it's brought with it from the past. But before I begin, I'd like to clarify some things. I want to make it clear I'm not here to bash the game or make anyone feel bad for liking it. I don't hate Pokemon Sword and Shield. I couldn't if I tried because of what this series means to me. And you might be surprised to hear I'm not up in arms about those same commonly cited reasons as to why so many would consider this game bad. Personally, I don't care about the graphics. I don't agree with the rhetoric that this game looks outright terrible. In fact, I think it looks genuinely beautiful in places. I also couldn't care less about the National Dex debacle, and I'm completely indifferent towards the new designs too. They're fine. Like usual, there's some cool ones and there's some stinky ones. I also don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to fix this game. It'd be the height of arrogance to suggest I know better than those working in an industry that I've never stepped foot in. So if it ever does sound like I'm pulling a why is it like this when it should be like that, please know it comes from a place of selfish preference. The reason I'm discussing Pokemon Sword and Shield today and why I thought this game's execution was bungled is because I genuinely believe that underneath all its glaring faults is a game that, if given the time and care, could have been legitimately great. To the developers' credit, they try some things with this game, and in places they even get it right. I'd like to think if this was given some time for reworking and polish, we could have been talking about a totally different experience here. So to be fair to what this game is and what it does well, before I devolve into Paulie Pissbaby whinging about why this game is bad because it isn't what I wanted it to be, I wanted to start by highlighting the things that I genuinely like about it. Firstly, I'm a big fan of nearly everything surrounding the gyms in this game. The cast of leaders in the Galar region are really fun, and while they aren't all incredibly fleshed out characters, they do have some fantastic designs. And for those that are given a chance to display their personalities, they exist as some of the best parts of the game. Like when meeting Piers, the gym leader in the beat-up town of Spikemouth. A place so cramped and dingy you're physically unable to Dynamax your Pokemon in the gym battle, giving the fight an old school back alley scrap type vibe. I also think the idea of a pessimistic gym leader who's almost disinterested by the idea of defending his crown to be a really interesting dynamic. I was equally enthused by Miss Opal too, the elderly leader of the fairy type gym. I loved the gimmick of answering her questions about fairy type Pokemon during your gym challenge, as she provides buffs or debuffs whether you're correct, and how it's turned on its head come the battle against her, as Miss Opal presents you with personal questions about herself that you couldn't possibly know the answers to. It's a great bit of personality displayed in a place where it doesn't conventionally show up. As well as being home to some of the more engaging battles in the game, the gyms themselves were also well executed examples of something that I have been begging for since the series' beginning. I audibly rejoiced when I got to the first gym in Sword and Shield and saw that other trainers were there partaking in the gym challenge. It seems so obvious, but it's something that's been bizarrely absent from most of the games. In each iteration, you're told you're partaking in an epic challenge in which trainers from all over the region participate in, yet throughout your entire journey, you will never encounter another challenger in any of these gyms. The most you'll get is word of your rival also competing, perhaps seen entering or leaving a gym, and that's it. Here, in a room like this, it feels like I'm merely one of hundreds of trainers desperate to be the champ, a complete nobody, and that's what it should be like. This approach is so much more appealing because when I do begin the gradual climb to stardom, the rise to the top feels that much more genuine and earned. Upon becoming the champ, I want it to feel like an achievement, not a birthright. Now unfortunately, the concept doesn't get fleshed out beyond this example, and the plot does fall back into the chosen one hero narrative, but even just having this goes a long way in conveying that sense of scale and competition the gym challenge should possess, and I hope it's something the series expands on. In addition, the battles against the leaders themselves are also a step in the right direction, as they take place within these enormous football stadiums in front of thousands of screaming fans. The atmosphere of these battles make them feel so much more important than the usual squabble in a drab and sweaty gym in which there are no witnesses. There's a pressure and big fight feel here that was non-existent in the earlier games until the Final Four. And I like how it uses these stadiums to flaunt this game's battle gimmick, Dynamaxing, an ability that turns the gym battles into these giant kaiju clashes. I've always felt the series has lacked a proper sense of verticality in regards to the Pokemon. On the handhelds using 2D sprites in a top-down view, it was always a challenge to convey just how domineering in size some of these Pokemon are relative to humans. So it's amazing to see the Pokemon here get to show off just how large and menacing they are, and the Dynamaxing mechanic and the alternate forms Pokemon take when Dynamaxed takes full advantage of this. For example, the literal trash Pokemon and my spirit animal Garbodor can usually be seen with various bits of waste and rubbish stuck within his sludge makeup. But when Dynamaxed, we get a sense of how dangerous a Pokemon it actually is in concept, having collected cars, planes, and even buildings onto its body. When standing this tall, bathed in red light, there's a feeling of legitimate danger and recklessness here. As if in the event the Pokemon stopped listening to its trainer, everyone in the stadium would be in grave danger. Another addition I was pleasantly surprised by was the initial wild area. The area exists as this vast wilderness where Pokemon roam free, and upon my first frolic, I was pleasantly surprised by the sheer variety of Pokemon to be found here. I thought it was amazing that before even stepping foot in the first gym, I was able to acquire a full team consisting of fire, water, grass, fighting, ice, and electric type Pokemon that I all liked. It was a much needed variation from the usual early game tradition of acquiring your starter, and then a bird, and then a dog, and then a bug. However, I think I liked it more in concept, as it's an addition that could have been executed a little better. It quickly begins to feel barren and lifeless when it should probably feel a bit more intimidating and dangerous, but should it return and be expanded upon in a future game, I can envision it being the best part of it. Lastly, I was a big fan of the customization in this game, building upon the appearance options that the series has slowly introduced in the last few entries. I appreciated that it wasn't a mandatory activity, but rather a fun side option that you could indulge in, like in Animal Crossing. And it finally gave me something to spend my money on, as I find I'm always left with an abundance of cash come endgame. Being able to completely personalize and transform your character gave some much needed personality to a protagonist who's usually a replaceable blank canvas. Now, I wish I had some more nice things to say about this game, but unfortunately the list ends there. My grievances with the title far outweigh the positives, and I can only praise what it does for so long before its flaws start to present themselves. So I think it's time to get into what this game gets horribly wrong. Most of my problems with Pokemon Sword and Shield can be categorized into two primary issues. The first being those with the writing and characters, which can be described as uninspired, and the second being with the design choices, some of which are honestly kind of baffling and they make my tum-tum hurt. So I'd like to start by getting into this game's story, as Pokemon Sword and Shield is a game that not only refuses to stray from the series' established and comfortable foundations, but one that's also a watered-down version of that same experience. To briefly summarize the events of Pokemon Sword and Shield, here's the footage of everything important that occurs during the player's progression through the Galar region's gym challenge. That's right, friends, from when you step foot into the first gym to when you finally conquer the last, absolutely nothing of value happens. You're given some lore of an event that happened long ago referred to as the Darkest Day, in which an extraterrestrial Pokemon created a black storm which caused wild Pokemon to sporadically Dynamax, prompting them to run berserk, almost destroying the region, and how the evil was defeated and the region saved by two Pokemon that now exist only as legend. As our protagonist cleverly deduces, one of those legendary Pokemon was the wolf we encountered within the opening hour of the game. However, it's not until after the 8th and final gym, where you begin the Champion Cup, will the story then begin to develop, meaning somewhere around 15 hours of gameplay, an old spooky folklore is the only meaningful plot hook. So until things pick up after the gym challenge, this game is expecting and reliant on you to find your own motivations to proceed through this gym challenge to become the champion, because it certainly doesn't give your character any. Now, a game doesn't always need a Hollywood story and character motivations if the gameplay is the focus, but we're talking about turn-based battles here, and I don't think I should be expected to do it purely because I've done it so many times before. And if it sounds like I'm criticizing Pokemon Sword and Shield for just being a Pokemon game with a Pokemon story, I'd argue it barely even tries to live up to the already simplistic narrative it's told repeatedly in the past. For example, there are so many events that occur during this game where you're not even present when they happen. We're talking multiple instances where something suddenly happens just off screen, and you're told to quickly rush to see what's happening. Often by the time you get there, the situation is already over or has even resolved. It's possible that this is a result of the game being rushed out the door for a 2019 holiday release, but it creates such frustration when things are happening at and around our main character, but not to them. Why am I being told about these events instead of living them? I can see it going for this unpredictable chaos, anything could happen at any moment angle, but the majority of this story just comes off as unfocused. And the reason it's frustrating is because when it does reach the part where the story picks up again, it's actually really interesting, as the chairman interrupts your battle with the champion to announce he's caused the return of the Darkest Day. In fact, from this point on, I think the game is significantly better because after 15 hours, there's finally stakes. It's a narrative with an eventual destination, it just doesn't know how to build to it in a way that uses your time and attention effectively. In fact, I'd say the majority of the cutscenes in this game are meandering, bordering on time wasting. designed to forcefully dump exposition or explain game mechanics in a way so carefree of story and character integrity that I think even a child would begin to feel irritated. So to get into this game's most egregious example, I'd like to talk about our friend Hop. Hop is the traditional childhood friend / rival character of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Every game in the series has seen this character exist in some capacity, but Hop is a particularly unique case. Because here, he functions in a way that the series has never really seen before. Not to say that you don't ever battle him, because oh boy do you ever, but it's because Hop's character arc progresses a little differently from the rivals of old. Hop's deal is that he's the younger brother of the current Pokemon champion, Leon, and Hop just adores him. He thinks his older brother is the coolest guy and aspires to one day be just like him, becoming champion himself. And if the idea of a young, impressionable individual blindly following an idol, blissfully ignorant to their character flaws, seems like an interesting story beat, I would agree with you. I think that's a fascinating relationship dynamic to explore. However, that's not what happens here. Hop's brother is presented with his only character flaw, nay, his only character trait, being that he has a poor sense of direction. What does occur though, as the two of you progress through the gym challenge together, is that Hop receives a knock to his confidence, becoming discouraged from pursuing the gym challenge because no matter how often he interrupts you on your journey, he can't seem to beat you. Realizing that if he can't, what chance does he have at the Champion Cup? I thought it was here where Hop would finally win me over. He'd begin a super inspirational redemption arc, or acknowledge his shortcomings and become a bad guy, finding solace and confidence in numbers, joining Team Yell or Chairman Rose. But neither of those things happen either. He's just sad for a while, and then he's not, and continues on with the gym challenge, still never beating you. At the end of the game, he just accepts you're too good and doesn't really know what to do with himself anymore until the professor offers him a position at the lab. A proposal which really feels like it's out of pity. And it just ends up feeling like a slap in the face. All this scene does is serve as a reminder that all the time I spent with Hop was for nothing. I'm not saying he had to achieve his goal and defeat me, but this guy, after having helped me save the world, feels like the exact same person from the beginning of the game. There was just over 20 hours spent here that amounted to zero growth, and it's when we start to compare the actions and motivations of Hop compared to rivals from the older games, where we'll get a better idea of just how poorly thought out and directionless this character is. In Pokemon Gold and Silver, our rival by comparison is a horrible person. Named Silver in the canon, this hunk is someone with a defined goal of becoming the strongest Pokemon trainer. His attitude suggesting he's someone who would step over any person or Pokemon to do so. Not only is Silver introduced in this narrative by getting physical with the protagonist, he also receives his first Pokemon by stealing it from the professor's lab. But it's his bullish attitude that becomes his eventual undoing, as he's easily defeated by the league champion in the middle of the game. And it's only after receiving a stern telling off does he begin to realize the error of his ways. Despite his embarrassment, the whooping was ultimately the lesson he needed to be set on the right path. Towards the end of the game, you bump into him again, and his demeanor has changed completely. His serious nature is still there, but for the first time, he wants to battle not out of malice, but out of friendly competition, to prove to you that he's a good Pokemon trainer. During your final battle together, you'll even notice he's evolved his Golbat into a Crobat, which only happens when it reaches a high friendship level, showing us that he's now learnt to care for his Pokemon, no longer viewing them as weapons but as companions. The reason I wanted to highlight Silver's journey here is because in this game, our rival doesn't win either. Instead, he's given the emotional victory of having become a better person. The fact he isn't champion really doesn't matter because he and the player have experienced something that's ultimately more important. Watching his growth was in itself more satisfying than seeing him achieve his goal of being the strongest trainer. Contrasting this back to Pokemon Sword and Shield, what's mind-boggling is that the rival character of this ilk exists in this game. There's 2 of them, and unsurprisingly, they're both way more interesting than Hop. Bede is a narcissist, believing he's destined to become champion after being endorsed by the chairman, and undergoes this whole personal journey similar to Silver, where he's humbled after you beat him and is taken down a notch after Miss Opal takes him under her wing. Then there's also Marnie, the aloof challenger supported by the mischievous Team Yell. Hailing from Spikemouth, everything about her just screams intrigue, as she has perhaps the edgiest trainer design to date. She has this whole ending where she tries to become less serious and gets all embarrassed when you walk in on her learning to smile, and it's fun. There's a personal journey here for both of these rivals, as you've impacted their lives in a significant way. And it's after spending time with these characters where you can't help but beg the question, then what purpose does Hop serve? And I think the answer to that is the unfortunate fact that Hop exists solely to be both the game's tutorial and tour guide that simply refuses to go away. From the very beginning of this game, Hop cements himself as a nuisance to your progress. There are 17 instances before the first gym in which gameplay comes to a screeching halt because you enter a cutscene with Hop. Now, I don't mind when the beginning of a game is a little more cutscene or text heavy than the rest of it, as it's here where characters and story and exposition are established. But here, they just feel like interruptions. And that's because whenever I was forced into one of these cutscenes as someone who has played a mainline Pokemon game before, nothing of value was ever shared. What Hop has to say for the overwhelming majority of this game is pointless. Those character moments I shared earlier are sparse, and for the most part his dialogue consists of directions to your next objective. But when implemented like this, not only does it make Hop extremely unlikable, it also makes the game feel slow. And when that game is also one that drip feeds you a story that you've kind of already heard before, you start to see my problem. Even if, for the sake of argument, we pretend that everything Hop says here is important and mandatory to fully understand and enjoy this experience, I still think that there are so many better ways all of this information could have been implemented. An execution that wouldn't be to the detriment of the gameplay. Even a simple option at the beginning of the game to indicate that you've played a Pokemon game before, thus allowing you to skip the tutorial segment, would have been appreciated. But unfortunately, Sword and Shield assumes that every player needs to know this stuff. And it's when we start to look at other instances like this where Sword and Shield's design begins to unravel, revealing an interior that's entirely void. We've already discussed the underwhelming story and its underdeveloped characters, so I'd now like to talk about this game's design, as it's one that I think even the newest of Pokemon fans would feel let down by. See, I'm all for accessibility. I think making your game as approachable as possible so that more people can engage with it is a good thing. But it's apparent that with Pokemon Sword and Shield, the desire to become increasingly accessible and child-friendly has come at the exorbitant cost of any and all charm and creativity. Sword and Shield director Shigeru Omori would reveal in interviews that this game was developed at the same time as Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, a game designed to introduce and transition Pokemon Go players to a more traditional Pokemon experience. The Let's Go games would heavily modify the series staples to become something more of a hybrid game style, as Omori goes on to state that the teams collaborated heavily. So you have to imagine that the impact of Pokemon Go's arrival in 2016 played a significant part in shaping how Sword and Shield would present itself. The staggering amount of people that were introduced to this series via the mobile game was simply too large a number to ignore. And while I'm sure it serves as a welcoming next step into the world of Pokemon for those that began with Pokemon Go, then Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, when this game's compared to the mainline Pokemon series, Sword and Shield is depressingly simple and noticeably lacking in any sort of individuality. For example, let's take the concept of Sword and Shield's region. The Galar region's design has taken direct inspiration from the United Kingdom. From the language used by the characters, to the clothing, to the landscapes of farming towns on the outskirts of these industrial steam-powered cities, it's an environment that at first seems well realized. But it's when you look at the layout of the region on a map where Galar's design is exposed as painfully dull. This map is linear. Literally a straight line from the beginning of the game in Postwick to the end of the game in Winden. When the player is made to traverse left or right, they're always conveniently escorted back to the center. This game feels like it was designed not only for someone new to Pokemon, but someone new to video games. And while it's now impossible to doubt where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to be doing, doubly so when you have Hop reiterating all of this, the design also means the region has been robbed of any sense of tangible world building. When everything presented here is this precise and clean, it doesn't feel like this is a believable landmass of Pokemon conquered by an industrial revolution. It just feels like a giant video game level meticulously designed so I can never get lost. In fact, I can't stray off the allotted path to the next gym even if I tried to, because there isn't a second path to stray onto. There aren't any optional areas in this game at all, so you're left trudging through what feel like corridors that connect the towns together, with a fixed camera that makes sure you couldn't possibly miss anything. If we were to compare this design back to that of the Hoenn region from Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, a quick glance of the landscape here would suggest that this is a place that is much more likely to actually exist. Now, part of that is because the Hoenn region's layout is based on the real-world Japanese main island of Kyushu, rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise, but a larger part in why it feels more natural is because there was an attention to detail here that was considered beyond just player convenience. As the cleverly designed route for the player to follow is hidden under a dynamic tropical environment. Through their journey, a player will traverse beaches, a jungle, a volcano, and desert, with differing weather depending on what part of the region they're in. And since the land is separated by these large bodies of water, there's a sense of freedom and adventure here that the Galar region sorely lacks. Especially because there's parts of this world that you could just miss if you didn't take the risk of venturing out on the seas in every direction. It actively rewards the players that are willing to explore every corner of this map with more content. So it never feels like you're being held by the hand through this world, but that you're actively discovering parts of it yourself. So even though these two regions are designed to do the exact same thing in leading the player through its world until they reach the champion, one is way more exciting to traverse through than the other. But I think the largest part of the reason why Hoenn feels so believable actually has to do with the towns that are found across its landscape, all of which feel like they were born from and cater to the direct environments they were built in. For example, Lava Ridge Town is found just south of Mount Chimney, home to an active volcano. Because of this, the town boasts a spring that's heated from the nearby underground magma, and has thus been turned into a business which is frequented by the town's elderly citizens. A quick discussion with one will tell us that the springs have become renowned outside of the town and are somewhat veiled by legend, suggesting that a dip in them will provide all kinds of beneficial properties. So, without having to outright tell us, we can infer that Lava Ridge Town was built around these hot springs after they were discovered, and relies on an economy based on the tourism brought in by them. It's not any kind of information that's going to help us achieve our goal of being the very best like no one ever was, but it's this kind of thought and care that goes a long way in making your game's world feel legitimate. And when we contrast it back to Sword and Shield, now we get a better understanding of just how devoid of character the Galar region is. As nice as this town looks, there's nothing here from its layout to its architecture to its inhabitants that make it feel unique to this environment. All of these buildings and the people within them can, and some do, exist elsewhere. And it's this argument that leads me to my next gripe with Sword and Shield, as it's because of this increased, we'll call it passion for accessibility, that created the consequence of this region feeling entirely fake. For me personally, some of this also comes down to the fact that this is an experience that I've already played to death. It's been a gripe of mine since the beginning, how the gym challenge is a convenient breadcrumb trail around the map. I guess I should always consider myself lucky that I'm consistently from the town right before the first gym that the professor also lives in. But even then, I think it's these old issues that have managed to wriggle their way back into a new Pokemon game that are actively hurting the believability of Galar being a living, breathing place for everybody playing. As, once again, everyone who inhabits this region is super passionate about Pokemon all of the time, and for some reason, also you specifically. Everything the NPCs talk about in this world is expressed with this weird Twilight Zone, something's not quite right here enthusiasm for everything. And I don't understand why it ever was and still is like this. Sometimes I felt like I was going insane playing this because if NPCs aren't talking about the gym challenge, they manage to somehow be worse than Hop in saying absolutely nothing at all. I just think the geographical, economical, political, and social dynamics of these regions are yet to be fully realized, which is a shame when considering just how robust this property's premise is. But even for someone who isn't a Pokemon superfan and has better things to do than think about this stuff like I do, I'd still imagine they too would be longing for some proper world building here, especially when the game so flippantly disregards it for what I can only assume is out of a fear of being inaccessible. For example, upon booting up the game for the first time, we witness an introduction in which the chairman of the Galar Pokemon League is standing in the middle of a rapturous stadium, packed with adoring fans, where he then proceeds to tell everyone what Pokemon are. Like, I get it's intended for the player, but it's not like the fourth wall is being broken here like in the previous games. We're supposed to believe he's directly addressing the stadium and a television broadcast. People who gathered for the sole purpose of watching a Pokemon battle. And before it begins to sound like I'm getting into nitpicky, smugly revealing the plot hole CinemaSins territory, the reason I point to this specifically is because it's an example of what is perhaps this game's biggest issue. The fact that yes, a lot of the new stuff feels incomplete and ill-considered, but then on top of those concerns are the same old Pokemon problems. Sticking with our example here to explain what I mean, say we let this one slide and acknowledge that this text is meant for the player. Is it even possible in 2020 there's someone playing this with zero knowledge of what Pokemon is? Why are we doing the exact same introduction 20 years after Pokemon exploded into the current zeitgeist? In an age where Pokemon is the most financially successful media property ever. Even my dad, a man who exclusively plays Dr. Mario on the NES, claiming that watching gameplay from anything after the 6th console generation gives him motion sickness, has a general understanding of what's going on here. Imagine if every Mario game began with the brothers reiterating that they were Italian plumbers who partake in the rescue of Princess Peach from the clutches of Bowser. It would be completely unnecessary because we already know that. In fact, that's been the deal for 35 years now. The reason I buy a Mario game isn't to be reminded of that fact, but rather because I'd like to see how the design has evolved. And it's when we compare Sword and Shield to examples like this, when we leave the Pokemon bubble, where we begin to realize just how lost of an identity the Pokemon games have. This game, specifically, seems to be both hopelessly stuck in tradition, but is also desperately trying to appeal to a new generation. Introducing things that seem entirely unnecessary, refusing to move away from its roots because it doesn't know anything else. Leaving us with countless moments that don't feel helpful or even necessary for new fans, while coming off as insulting to the old ones. Because the sum of all my arguments here leads me to believe that everything in Pokemon Sword and Shield has either been done before, or it's been done better. And if it wasn't, it was at the very least faster to get through or presented in a way that felt like my time wasn't being wasted. It genuinely hurts me to say, but Pokemon is simply behind the times now. And when it exists as such a titan of the video games industry, I don't think that what it's currently presenting is good enough. But there's honestly no point in debating how we got here, because we already know exactly why Pokemon Sword and Shield is like this. Game Freak, the developers of every mainline Pokemon game, are a tired team. These days, they're made to squeeze out a Pokemon game almost yearly. And while it's great for some fans as they now reliably receive more Pokemon content every holiday season, I think the consequences of this increased output far outweigh the positives, as this current chaotic schedule has left the newer Pokemon games feeling incredibly outdated and unfinished. Whether it's due to lack of time to innovate and revise, or a fear of changing up a winning formula that brings them an absurd amount of money every year, there's a fundamental problem here that leaves these new entries feeling hollow and lifeless. I don't personally blame anyone at Game Freak for this, and I don't mean to poo-poo their individual efforts. I can't imagine how many hours and how much money went into making something like this. And for everything I criticize it for, please remember I'm someone who has and will never make a video game as competent as this one. That being said, I think that these games feel like they're designed with everybody in mind, meaning they're really for no one in particular, which is soul-crushing. Because to me, Pokemon was never really about catching them all. It was always about the drive to improve, the bond that's forged and strengthened when a goal is shared, and the satisfaction of pushing yourself beyond what you thought was capable. And I just don't feel that anymore, because I think that's an ethos the developers themselves either moved away from or forgot. In any case, what I have to say about Pokemon Sword and Shield ultimately doesn't matter, because these games, regardless of any flaws that might be present, consistently turn a profit. And I think that's what I'm struggling to deal with at the moment, as it's been in writing and researching this that has made me realize that maybe the problem here is me. This is a series that I am unable to separate from my memories. These games are partly responsible for helping me learn to read and make friends, and those facts possess a value for me that I can't quantify. But for as important as it was to me, maybe it's time to move on. These games are and will probably forever be for children, and that's okay. The memories are enough, and I shouldn't expect this game series to grow with me. That being said, I still think Pokemon games have the potential to be amazing. I can't say that this met my expectations, but in all honesty, I'm not sure if it ever could have. It bore the unfair burden of having to live up to 21 years of hype. It was almost inevitable that I'd be left feeling disappointed, which is why I can't quite bring myself to outright dislike Sword and Shield, because under all its ugly flaws is still an exciting prospect. They didn't quite nail it here, but I could see what they were going for, and I want to believe that Pokemon as a video game series is holding back. But until that day I'm proven right, I think it's time to distance myself, at least from the games, for a while. I don't know if I can fully remove Pokemon from my life, but perhaps some separation is necessary if it's what's required to rekindle the love once more. Thanks for watching.